In this video, we're going to continue styling the application, and we're going to turn our attention towards this little box, which I'm going to call our widget, and what's inside of it. So we have a little widget header, and we have the widget body down below. We want to set up classes to get those styled, then we can focus on what actually goes inside of them: the title, the buttons, the list of items, and the form. So step one over inside of Visual Studio Code is going to be to just clean up the open files. I'm going to be closing down quite a few: button, options, option. I'm basically going to close every single file except for the styles file and the settings.scss file. I'm going to kick things off by creating a new file inside of the components folder. This one is _widget.scss. And before we go ahead and actually add anything into it, let's just import it. Inside of styles.scss at import, we are diving into the relative components folder. In there, we have widget. Excellent. Now that we have this imported, the first thing we're going to do is define what makes up the widget header. So that's going to be this slightly darker blue box with the title and the remove all button. Let's go ahead and start there with a comment widget header and then a class selector, selecting any elements with the class of widget hyphen header. Now we can define the styles that are going to make up that widget header, and the first and most obvious one is the background color. Now, as you can see, we're going for that dark UI look, which means we have a lot of slight shade variations. We're going to have another blue-based variable right here. Under dark blue, we're just going to have blue. And I've already picked out a hex value for this. That is the hex value 3C4251. Excellent. Now this is going to be the background color for widget header. So background blue. Before we go any further, adding the other styles that make up the widget header, let's just go ahead and get this showing up by actually using the class somewhere inside of our JSX. That's going to happen inside of the options component. Now in here we have our remove all button, but you'll notice that we don't have the actual title. We don't have the your options title as it shows up in the final version of the app. So we can go ahead and add that. We're going to add an H3 up here. We're going to set the text equal to your options. And what we want to do is take your options and button and put them inside of the widget header. How are we going to get that done? Well, once again, we're just going to create a wrapper div. We're going to set up this div. We're going to put the header content inside of it. Then we're going to go ahead and give the div the correct class name. Right here, class name equals, and we're going to set that equal to widget header, the one that we just set up. Now, if we save the application as it currently stands, what are we going to have? We're going to have a widget header with a slightly darker shade of blue, lighter, but this does not solve our problem. We still don't have everything in place. Things aren't left to right. They are stacked up and down, and we have some color corrections to make as well. So let's go ahead and add just a few more styles to the widget header area. Right after background, we're going to go ahead and start with the color, setting the color equal to the variable we already have, off white. Perfect. Now if we save that, we're going to see that the styles once again are applying, and we're getting the correct colors showing up for the widget header. We're also going to be adding a little bit of padding so the contents of the header aren't pushed up right up against the edge, and I'll use padding with the M size variable to get that done. Now, the last part is also the trickiest part. So the goal here is to take this stuff and put it side by side, pushing your options way up against the left and pushing remove all way up against the right. How exactly are we going to get that done? To get that done, we're going to be using the display type of Flexbox. If you've never used Flexbox before, it creates much nicer ways to set up layouts. So accomplishing something like this, where we have all of the space distributed evenly inside, becomes really, really easy. Let's go ahead and kick things off. The first thing we have to do to use Flexbox is to change the display type. We're going to set display equal to flex. And if we save the widget file, we're going to notice that right away we have some changes. The content is now showing up left to right. So everything inside of the widget header is going to be distributed left to right. All we have to do is teach Flexbox how to distribute that space. And to do that, we use one more property related to Flexbox called justify content, which we'll be using over and over again throughout the course. If we set this value to space between, we're going to see exactly what we were hoping for. All of the leftover space is going to be distributed between the elements. Now, there are obviously other values right here. We can use space around. That is going to distribute the space around all of the elements. And in that case, you can see we have an even space distribution. In our case, though, we want to push everything up against the sides, so we are going to stick with space between. All extra space should be distributed between those two elements. You'll notice that we still have some weird spacing over here. There's a lot of extra vertical space. That all has to do with the H3 right here. Currently, it has a margin on the top and the bottom that is part of the default styles. What we're going to go ahead and do is set the margin for that H3 equal to 0, and that's going to be your challenge for the video. So step 1 is going to be to set up an element selector for widget header. So we have something inside of widget header. We're going to set up the element selector, and you could call the element something like title. Then you're going to go ahead and set margin. You're just going to set it equal to 0. And finally, you're going to go ahead and use the class. You want to make sure to actually use the class so the H3 has the margin reset. Take some time to knock out all 3 steps, then test your work. In the end of the day, we should see the extra space going away. Pause the video, and when you're done, click play. All right, let's go ahead and knock this out. The first part was to set up the element selector correctly. So we're creating an element for widget header. So we start off with widget header, and then we use underscore underscore followed by the element name. Anything would have worked. I'm going to go ahead and use title. If you used something slightly different, that's fine, as long as you got the syntax correct. Next up, all we have to do is set the margin. We're going to set the margin equal to 0 on all sides. And finally, we just have to use the class. I'm going to remove the comments, save these styles, and use the class. Over here, we have our H3. We just need to set up a class name, setting it equal to the selector we just defined, the class selector, widget header underscore underscore title. Now, if we go ahead and save all of our files, we should see the header showing up. The margin has been set for the H3, and what we have is the final header styles. We have our title on the left, we have our button on the right. Everything is still completely functional, it just looks a whole lot nicer. And now let's go ahead and actually add the background for the content of the widget. We have our message or the list if there are items, and we have the form. We want to go ahead and give that the color as seen here. So what does that mean for us? It means another variable, another selector, and another class name attribute. Let's go ahead and kick things off in the settings file. This is one of the last blues that we're going to set up. I promise it actually is the last one. This one is called light blue. And the value for this is a hex value, and the code is 464. That's B5E. Awesome. So we have this light blue set up, and we can now go ahead and use it. It is going to be part of the widget itself. So up at the very top, I'm going to create one for widget, the selector dot widget, and all we're going to do is set the background equal to the color we just set up, light with an L, light blue. And then we're going to go ahead and use this class in the appropriate place. That is going to be over inside of Indecision app. So we have our container right here. We have our action, we have options and add option. We want all of this stuff to be in the widget. So what we're going to do is create the div once again. We're going to take the stuff we're trying to style and we're going to shove it inside of the div. Then we're going to go ahead and remove all of the extra space and actually set up the class name right here. Class name equals widget. We can then go ahead and save all of the application files, and the end result is we have our blue box showing up. Now you'll notice that below the blue box, we actually have no space. So if you're scrolling up and down, it's crammed right up against the edge of the screen, and that's really annoying to look at. So we can go ahead and fix that by just adding a margin bottom right here. Margin bottom. And we're going to set that equal to the XL size, the same size we used for the margin bottom for the big button. Now if we scroll down, we have a little bit of space between the end of the widget and the browser's edge, creating a much nicer feel. Let's go ahead and wrap this video up with one final challenge where you're going to be required to set up the necessary code to get this little message styled. That's going to be our widget message. And in the end of the day, it looks like this. Please add an option to get started. It's centered. It's got some space around it. We have a border on the bottom. We have a nice color. All of that is going to be up to you. Now I'll give you some guidance. So right here, what you're going to do is create a widget element selector. And you can call this one something along the lines of message. That'd get the job done. Then you're going to go ahead and actually use it. So use it on the p tag. That is where the message actually lives. So you're going to want to track down where that is inside of the application. Then you're going to go ahead and set up some styles. Now I'll give you some pseudocode for it, but you're going to have to set them yourself. So we're going to have an off-white color. We are going to have no margin. So you're going to want to set a style for that. We're also going to have the L size padding on all sides. Then we are going to center the text using, and we haven't used that guy before, it is text align, and we'll set it equal to center. And the last thing you're going to have to do is to set the border bottom. So you're going to set the bottom border to a 1 pixel solid border. And the color you're going to use is going to be a lightened version of the light blue variable we just defined. And you're going to lighten it by 10%. Now we already used darken. You're going to need to figure out exactly what the lighten function is called. Then you're going to go ahead and actually pass in the necessary arguments. And in the end of the day, you should see a nice light border on the bottom. So take as much time as you need to knock all of this out. Then go ahead and test your work, making sure it's all showing up as expected. And once you're done, you can go ahead and watch me go through the process. So take some time to pause the video, and when you're done, click play. All right, let's go ahead and knock this one out. Step 1 is going to be to define the selector widget __ message. And then we're going to go ahead and actually apply this to the paragraph. That lives over inside of options. We have our message sitting right here, and it's conditionally rendered. The paragraph only shows up under some circumstances. We're going to be setting up the class name, and we're going to set it equal to the class that we just defined, widget __ message. Now we can save that file, and over inside of the styles file, we can actually start applying some styles. Let's start with the color, setting it equal to the off-white variable. And if we go ahead and actually save the widget, we should at least see that showing up, and it is indeed showing up. Next up, we want to remove the default margin, so we'll set margin to 0. And I also said I wanted you to set the padding on all sides equal to the L size variable. So we'll configure that as well. Next up was to use the property that I defined, that was text align center to center the text. And at this point, we have a lot of the final styles in place. The only thing we need to do is actually set up the bottom border color. I'm going to go ahead and do that using border bottom. Border bottom. We're going to use 1 pixel. The one time we will use pixels is for small 1 pixel borders. 1 pixel solid. And right here, we want to use lighten. If you remember from the documentation, that was lighten. And it took the exact same 2 arguments as darken. It took the color you want to lighten and the percent you want to lighten it by. We have light blue, and we want to lighten it by 10%. Now we can remove all of the comments for the challenge setup. We can save the widget file, and over here in the browser, what do we get? We get the final styled message showing up. The message is only here when there are no options. When I add an option, let's say I'm adding an option for a vacation spot. I'm about to go to Thailand, so we'll toss that in. Spelt wrong, of course. You can see that the message does indeed go away. So there we have it. That is it for this video. We have some great styles in place, just a little more left to go. So stay tuned. I'll see you in the next one.